water, right? There used to be a large consensus that said that you could have what they call a dry drowning. So they used to think that you would get submerged in water, water would hit your larynx and it would spasm. And you would drown simply from laryngospasm rather than actually from the drowning itself or from water entering the lungs. And the reason they thought that was because on autopsy, they cut people open and they wouldn't find water on them. They said, well, that's pretty fucking weird if you drown but you don't have any water in your lungs. And it turned out that was incorrect. So what do you think was happening?
Water was diffusing into the vasculature.
Yeah. So they started doing autopsies on people who drowned in fresh water, doing basically blood cultures to see what's going on. And what really is happening is all that water is just diffusing into the bloodstream from the lungs. So they pretty much ruled out the fact that a dry drowning can actually occur. It's generally going to be from fluid entering the lungs. So what happens? What happens is someone becomes submerged. And we've all probably been in the pool and you're messing around and you're under the water and then you forget where the top is and then you start panicking and you think you're going to die. So that's essentially what happens in a drowning, right?
Cash just stands up.
Not today. So the problem is with the submersion event, right? So the person becomes submerged, and then naturally, what are we going to do as we get submerged in the water? Hold your breath, right? So the person starts a breath hold, which is great for a short period of time, but eventually it's going to stop that. So the person breath holds.
Should we just take dry drowning?
Yeah, dry drowning,
We'll just
When did they
Because
figure
he's
that out?
supposed to
Like,
respond.
I feel like I remember being taught that.
Yeah, in like the 80s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I still thought that too. Right here.
So again, it doesn't regularly happen. So someone has submersion, they breath hold, and then what are they going to do? As they start realizing that, oh my gosh, I'm dying.
They're going to struggle.
Yeah, they're struggling. So a couple of problems are happening here, right? So the patient's breath holding, and now they're struggling. So what's going to develop as a result of the breath holding? Yeah, they start to get hypoxia. We see hypoxia, and can we exchange carbon dioxide? No. So we get hypoxia, and we also start to see hypercapnia, where the patient starts to get a large amount of CO2 developing in the bloodstream. So what happens next is they start panicking, flailing around, trying to find the surface, which is going to cause an increase in what?
Oxygen.
Yeah, I start having to have anaerobic metabolism, right? I'm moving my limbs around, I'm basically exercising under the water while I'm not breathing, and increasing the production of lactic acid. So the patient's going to become even more acidotic. So increased lactic acid production. And when I combine these two things together, I combine my hypoxia and hypercapnia with the lactic acid production, what's going to happen to this person's CNS function?
Depressed.
Yeah, I start to see CNS depression. So these things combined, it's kind of a weird flow chart, lead to CNS depression. The patient has CNS depression, which is going to lead them to do what? Can they hold their breath anymore, close their throat off? No, so basically people give up, right? So apparently there's a moment of euphoria before people start to lose consciousness. We get that CNS depression, loss of consciousness.
That's comforting.
And then fluid fills the lungs. So the majority of drownings that we're going to deal with will be freshwater drownings, which tend to pose some significant risks to patients as that fluid fills the lungs. So in terms of immediate life threats, really it's the hypoxia, hypercapnia, and acidosis that's going to kill this patient, right? So we know in terms of if this patient's not getting saved and they're going to die under the water, they're dying under the water because of acidosis, hypoxia, hypercapnia. They basically shut down their entire ability to exchange gases by filling their lungs with water. So fluid fills the lungs, and the patient eventually is going to die. Because we know these things are going to happen again. So this is death. But what if the patient is saved? What if The lifeguard pulls them out of the pool, does some CPR, gets all the water out of their lungs, and they're still at risk of dying.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you guys remember, there's been, I think it was last year, the year before, they did a PSA campaign that talked about secondary drowning because people weren't taking their kids to the hospital. So, small child falls in the pool, sucks in a whole bunch of water, they, mom and dad pull them out, do some CPR, water, cough up the water, and they're like, oh, okay, everything's fine. And then the kid dies 2 days later from secondary drowning because they didn't go to the hospital because of all the negative effects associated with having all that fluid in the lungs. So I can't remember what, it was actually quite a terrifying PSA that they did, but it's on the radio, I think I heard it. So what happens is we can have primary death or death from the drowning event itself, so the patient will drown, or what can happen is we get the secondary drowning, or that patient who's going to die in the basically 24 hours after the drowning event. Basically, so if they die in the first 24 hours, that person's just considered to have drowned. If they die any time after those first 24 hours, that's our secondary drowning, or the patient has died from complications associated with the fact that they just drowned. So if we take a look at the lungs and what's happening in the lungs, what's the problem with inhaling a large amount of fresh water?
Washes out your surfactant.
Yeah, so one of the big things is it's going to wash out surfactant. So I know that in my alveoli, I have all this surfactant that's supposed to be keeping them open. So this is surfactant. Lots of surfactant that's supposed to be keeping my airways open, but as I have water rushing in and sweeping it away, I start to lose that surfactant, or I get surfactant wash. So one of the things that can happen is surfactant wash, which can lead to what? Yeah, atelectasis or alveolar collapse, right? So I can get surfactant wash as it enters the lungs, and I can start to see atelectasis. What's the life threat that's going to develop, or what will this develop into? Shunt, yeah, so we can have shunt, and what's the cause of death? Yeah, so that atelectasis, as we start seeing the destruction of the alveoli, atelectasis eventually leads to adult respiratory distress syndrome. So as the alveoli collapse, they become destroyed, and then they'll break down, and that's when we get ARDS development. So one of the big problems is with surfactant wash. What else do we see is a big issue with someone who has a freshwater drowning? What's going to happen to all of that water?
Absorbed.
Yeah. The problem is that a lot of that water can enter the lungs and can shift into the bloodstream. Is there any carrying capacity of oxygen with this water? No. So I get hemodilution, right? So one of the problems associated with it is I start to get hemodilution, or I start to have decreased ability to carry oxygen in my bloodstream. So hemodilution. So I start to develop some big issues with oxygen carrying capacity, or I get basically an anemia as a result, because I'm filling my bloodstream with water instead of having blood there that's can carry oxygen. So I have decreased oxygen carrying capacity. Decrease in oxygen carrying capacity. And what's going to happen to my blood cells? So if I got a little blood cell sitting in here, is fluid going to keep away or go into him?
Swell.
Yeah. So the problem is fluid can go into my cells, and what happens when the cell swells? Yeah, eventually it explodes, right? So we get cell lysis. So the problems are that we can't carry oxygen, so water doesn't carry oxygen very well. And the problem is we can get hemolysis, or cell swelling, as a result of all of this water entering the bloodstream. The water enters the bloodstream, can enter my red blood cells. My red blood cells get bigger, 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 and then they lyse, or they explode as a result of having so much water. So we can get hemolysis. Or cell swelling and bursting as a result of all of the fluid building up. What else? What else is the problem with a freshwater drowning? Yeah, so freshwater generally has a lot more microorganisms and bacteria. So bacteria and fungi than freshwater. And I think the two primary bacteria and fungi that are found in freshwater can lead to meningitis. So a lot of big problems associated with it is that we can have either colonization of microbes in the lung itself, so we get all these microbes now building up in the lung as a result of our freshwater drowning, or we can get secondary infection. Those microbes can make their way into our bloodstream, circulate to our brain or spinal cord, and lead to secondary infection. So another large risk associated with a freshwater drowning is the fact that I can get either a pneumonia or a secondary infection. Associated with it.
Would you be septic?
Yeah, so and that's where they can lead as well. So pneumonia, secondary infection. So if the meningitis or the pneumonia itself doesn't kill the patient, then it can lead to sepsis, which can kill them. So this is kind of our near drowning or secondary drowning, where people are dying later from one of these events. That makes sense. The risk associated with a freshwater drowning. I think those are the only three things I've talked about.
And that's saying like a lake versus pool water, right?
What's that?
That's talking about like a lake.
So this
not
is
pool water.
So pool water, lake water, it's all the same. So obviously you're not going to get the microbes with pool water as much, but really we're comparing basically anything versus salt water. So drowning in an ocean versus drowning in your pool, a river, or a lake, anything.
Saltwater.
Saltwater pool, saltwater fish tank.
And the beginning of dilution, we said the cell lysis, that's more towards the fact that fresh water is like an isotonic
Right.
solution.
Yeah, if you think about it, it is, right? It doesn't have a lot of stuff in it. It's really just water. Yeah, so there's not as much of a problem. When we talk about saltwater drowning, that's when we're talking about having lots of salt in the lung. So if we look at, just in case, I don't know, where for some reason on the east or west coast,
So freshwater is isotonic or hypotonic?
freshwater is hypotonic. Yeah, so it's
That's
got,
yeah.
it doesn't have
Say
any
ISO?
You said iso.
Yeah, hypotonic, whereas our saltwater is hypertonic. Hypertonic solution. That's right. So if we're talking about a saltwater drowning, what are the big problems going to be associated with that? So obviously, this one's going to be the same. Surfactant wash is never going to change. Anytime I have something entering my lungs that can wash out my surfactant, then it's going to be an issue. But what's the problem with taking in a whole bunch of water that has a high salt content?
Dehydrate.
Yeah, it's going to dehydrate where?
Vasculature in the cells.
Right, it's going to dehydrate the vasculature in the cells. And what's going to happen to my alveoli?
Will dry out.
So not necessarily that our alveoli will dry, because remember where the water is, right? So if I have my alveoli here, if I have my bloodstream that water and electrolytes in it as well, I'm putting water that has a high content of electrolytes, right? So we'll picture the water entering this cell, and it has a ton of sodium. So we have salt water that has high sodium content. And we think about what's going to happen. We'll kind of blow up this. And we look at our cells. We have the cell lining of the alveoli. We have interstitial space. We have our vasculature. And we know that we have a hypertonic environment in our alveoli. Where's water going to be drawn to?
Into the alveoli.
Yeah, into my alveoli. So the problem is that water from my vasculature is going to shift interstitially, will shift into the cells of my alveoli, and then will shift into my alveoli. So I end up worsening my pulmonary edema and attempts to try and dilute that salty water that's in my lungs. So I actually draw fluid from my intravascular environment to try and dilute that heavy salt content that's in the fluid that's in my lungs. So what happens is I start to see water building up in my bronchioles and extensive water build up in my alveoli themselves. So I'm going to get massive swelling of the lung tissue themselves. So instead of in this case where we have a hypotonic solution that wants to go into the bloodstream, we have a hypertonic solution that's pulling fluid out of my bloodstream and causing excessive water to build up in the surrounding tissue and spaces in my alveoli. So I have lots of water shifting. The patient's at extreme risk of pulmonary edema. So their lungs basically shut down because we just fill up with fluid. Does that make sense? Difference between those two things?
So with the saltwater drowning, you're not going to get the hemodilution?
Right.
It's just going to be that.
Yeah. So with salt water, the surfactant wash is still a problem. And the second problem is the pulmonary edema.
So they become hypertensive with extra water.
So they'll become hypotensive. So both people will be hypotensive. In this case, I'm drawing fluid. So this person would be hypertensive. This person would be hypotensive. So I'm drawing vascular volume out into the lungs. They'll probably be dead by the time we see any extensive blood pressure changes. This guy is the one that's going to become hypertensive. We got increased circulating blood volume. We're putting more blood or more water into the bloodstream.
How quickly does the salt water, does that draw water?
Almost immediately, right? So as soon as it's like I don't know if you guys remember. They always talk about in science classes where they have the beaker with the little like pathway between them, the semi-permeable membrane. And as soon as they fill this with the salty fluid and this with the non-salty fluid, it shifts almost immediately. And the same thing's happening in the lungs, basically. So you see that fluid is getting drawn in almost immediately. It reminds me if you start pouring salt into solution, or you start seeing it sucking up and becoming pasty. Same thing's going to happen in the lungs. Does that make sense?
Fuck, I don't know.
Yeah. Either way, not good. So the only other problem with the hemolysis is as the cells die, we release intracellular contents. So it puts this patient at increased risk of hyperkalemia. Any questions about that? So we have to